are things I've been talking about for 10 years. I was standing up for pipelines 10 years ago when Mark Carney was opposing them. I've been saying that we need to approve resource projects quickly for the last 10 years while Mark Carney was supporting C-69 and the energy cap and other Liberal policies. Canada First reinvestment tax cut. Zero capital gains tax if you reinvest in Canada. You're a company that wants to sell a vacant piece of land to reinvest in building a new factory in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You want to take your money out of Canada to a foreign jurisdiction, you will pay capital gains tax. And that's why he will say anything he has to. He lied about the fact that he plagiarized 10 times in his thesis in order to get his degree. He lied about having moved his headquarters from Canada to the U.S. just 6 days after Trump threatened tariffs on our country. So you can count on him to say whatever he has to say in order to hold on and get the Liberals that fourth term in power. But under the Liberals, applications are lengthy and the economy is crashing. Why would any other company invest in this country with a long Liberal record of high taxes and blocking projects? But the good news is, we don't have to, after this lost Liberal decade, we don't have to elect them to a fourth term. We can choose change by putting Canada first with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources, and bring home paychecks and production so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength. Today, I'm unveiling yet another concrete proposal to bring about that vision. Today, I'm announcing the Canada First National Energy Corridor, a pre-approved corridor that will allow our incredible businesses to build pipelines, transmission lines, rail lines, and countless other kinds of infrastructure that we need to break our dependence on the Americans, ship our resources to ourselves and overseas markets, bring home powerful paychecks for our country, and stand up for ourselves in a position of strength. The permits would be pre-authorized. After consultations and environmental research, we would find the path that is safe for our citizens and for nature. Second, we would consult with First Nations, as is our duty under the Constitution of Canada. Third, we would lock down the permits and we would publish specifications and standards that companies have to meet so that they would do the projects in a responsible way that keeps everyone safe. Then the permits would be pre-published online and legally binding. In other words, the government would not have the legal right to reverse course and change its mind. This would remove the uncertainty. I understand why businesses after the lost Liberal decade would not want to take the risk of starting an application process that could cost them billions of dollars if they thought that maybe a future government would reverse course. That's why pre-approval is so important. Pre-approving the project would mean that the companies could invest with certainty, knowing what they have to do and what they can build. This certainty will allow the private sector to do the building. It will allow our businesses to invest, hire, and grow. We can build Canadian pipelines with Canadian steel to deliver Canadian energy to a Canadian refinery, perhaps right here in St. John. And that will cause a massive economic boom. Billions of dollars will flood into our government coffers from the resulting economic growth, money that can be used to improve our failing hospitals and our schools, building roads and other infrastructure we need, defeating poverty and lifting up our people, giving new jobs to our young tradespeople, 350,000 of whom we are going to train up through our Boots Not Suits plan. It will mean a new era of prosperity, and it adds to a broader plan that we've been systematically unveiling. For example, just yesterday, I announced the Canada First reinvestment tax cut. Zero capital gains tax if you reinvest in Canada. You sell your business and you reinvest in a Canadian stock that funds Canadian economic growth, zero capital gains tax. You You sell a rental property and reinvest it in building a new home in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You're a company that wants to sell a vacant piece of land to reinvest in building a new factory in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You want to take your money out of Canada to a foreign jurisdiction, you will pay capital gains tax. That's why it's called Canada First. We're going to be bringing home hundreds of billions of dollars and unleashing a boom. This will be economic rocket fuel for our Canadians to launch above and beyond the Americans. We will unleash an incredible economic boom that will turn Canada into a fortress. We'll honor the legacy of John A. Macdonald and Louis Saint-Laurent by adding pipelines, power lines, roads, rail that bind the nation together. One nation, bound together into a united country, self-reliant, sovereign, standing on its own 2 feet and standing up to the Americans from a position of strength. The choice is clear. After the lost Liberal decade of costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, can we afford to give Liberals a 4th term? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources to bring home our jobs so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength? Canada first for a change. Let's bring it home.
Thank you.
With St. John being the most trade-prone city in Canada and New Brunswick sending 92% of its exports to the United States, what would Conservative government do to help through this trade war and beyond?
Thank you. That's a very good question. This is one of the most trade-intensive economies in the world, St. John in particular, New Brunswick in general. We'll make sure that businesses have the cash they need, the liquidity required to pay their bills and keep people working. Our goal is to keep people working through this trade dispute. We need to retaliate against the Americans targeting goods we don't need, can make ourselves, or get elsewhere, so we maximize the impact on them while minimizing the impact on ourselves. Then I will present President Trump with a choice. Either you start a trade war with America's closest friend and neighbor, which will weaken both our economies, rendering our continent more vulnerable to risks from abroad, or you knock down the trade barriers, we trade more as two separate sovereign nations, we enrich both sides of the border, allowing us to spend massively on our military, so that both Canada and the U.S. separately, but cooperating together, are stronger, safer, and richer. I believe, presented with that choice, particularly as they get closer to midterm elections, I think that the Americans will, in the end, be forced to reverse these disastrous tariff policies. But we can't rely on the Americans to determine our economic destiny. Your question, it contains in it the problem. Why is it that after the lost Liberal decade, we are so dependent on the Americans for everything? For example, if the Energy East pipeline were approved today, there would be 1 million barrels of oil going from St. John to Europe. It's almost $100 million, depending on the price of oil. It's almost $100 million a day that would be transiting through here, paying refinery workers and all the businesses that they shop at around here to sell to Europe, and the Americans wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it because it would have been a direct transit out of North America to an overseas economy. If we had a national energy corridor today, St. John would not be so reliant on the Americans. We'd be able to transit billions and billions of dollars through this incredible city without worrying about what the Americans think. That is what we're trying to do with this Canada First policy. And the choice in the election is, after a lost Liberal decade, with costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, do they deserve a 4th term in power, or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government? It's right over there. So that's our next stop? I think we're going to a union shop instead. Oh, well, that will be fun too, but I think we should have worked that in. And you should have, we should have offered you guys some Moosehead before the press conference. I think you would have asked more sympathetic questions.
I've been to the small batch here. It's quite good.
Okay.
Sir, there are reports on mounting frustrations about how the campaign is going and the trailing polling numbers. What's your plan to turn things around, and will you make changes to the campaign leadership?
Some people have said that I should stop talking about the doubling housing costs that have denied an entire generation the chance to own a home after the lost Liberal decade. They say that we shouldn't be debating why single moms are lined up at food banks in record numbers after the lost Liberal decade. They suggest that we shouldn't debate why 50,000 of our citizens have lost their lives to drug overdoses under the radical Liberal drug policies. That we should just forget that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, that we should just ignore all of those things. I disagree. My purpose in politics is to restore Canada's promise so that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. It's hard work gets you a great life and a beautiful, affordable home on a safe street, protected by brave troops under a proud flag, are things I've been talking about for 10 years. I was standing up for pipelines 10 years ago when Mark Carney was opposing them. I've been saying that we need to approve resource projects quickly for the last 10 years while Mark Carney was supporting C-69 and the energy cap and other Liberal policies. I've stood up for tax cuts that will unleash growth in our economy over the last 10 years, in fact, over my entire career. The threats, the unjustified threats by President Trump further strengthened the argument in favor of the Canada First agenda that I've been fighting for my whole life. And while we propose those solutions, we will not forget the single mom who can't afford food. We will not forget the seniors who are choosing between eating and heating. We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids. We will not forget the families terrorized by crime and drugs, and so we will continue, despite calls to the contrary, to talk about those things, even if I am the only leader in the country that offers any change. And the choice, again, is whether, after this lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime, with our economy falling under the American thumb, do we give them, can we afford to give them a fourth term? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will restore Canada's promise?
En français.